It's really a pleasure to be with you to speak about a piece of music that, from my perspective as a practicing musician and as a music director of the New Haven Symphony, really falls very much at the center of what we think of as American music or the concert music of the United States, but has had the misfortune of having had a very difficult performance history and a reception history, no less the fact, which is somewhat disputed but widely reported as being the premiere of the piece in 1937 at the Cincinnati May Festival was broadcast nationally on national radio, but was taken off air midstream. The oratorio runs about 60 minutes long, and only about 25 minutes of the piece was aired. And the explanation that is often given is that there were so many callers calling in to protest the fact that a Black composer was given this platform to speak to the entire nation through a nationwide radio broadcast. And in my view, this is one reason why we are now giving the Connecticut premiere of this piece in 2025 rather than some 90 years ago. But of course, better late than never. And just a little bit of background, but of course, Dr. Ferdinand is the expert on Nathaniel Dett. Dett was born in Ontario, Canada, but spent most of his career in the United States. And my own personal knowledge of Dett until very recently was limited to his wonderful and groundbreaking adaptations and also original compositions of spirituals for a cappella chorus and also for a chorus and piano, chorus and organ. And my knowledge of Dett was very limited until quite recently when in the planning for the very first season of my music directorship of the New Haven Symphony, I went out looking for the great American oratorio and realized, first of all, the limits of my own knowledge, but secondly, that what I would consider to be the great American oratorio had never been performed by my orchestra, and that it was performed, I think, once at Carnegie in the 1960s, and then not again until 2012. And most recently, the British premiere of the piece was given sometime at the end of the pandemic in 2022, I believe, by a colleague of mine. And I'm currently speaking to you from Spain, and it's never been performed here. And so this piece, which I think stands at the intersection of a lot of some of the central concerns about American music. So, of course, Antonin Dvorak, on his visit to the United States, came away with the thought that the seed of American concert music is in the African American spiritual, but the afterlife of that comment, I think, until quite recently, has not included this piece. And one of the things that we would love to be able to contribute to in our small way at the New Haven Symphony is to help place this piece back at the center of the conversation about the development of concert music in the United States of America. So just a little bit about our performance this coming Sunday. When we decided to perform the piece, we had an extensive conversation about what the most useful contextualization for the piece would be. And this piece really stands at the intersection of so many different trends. From my conservatory education, the main echoes that I first heard were, from Nadia Boulanger, who was Dett's teacher in Paris, to Arnold Schoenberg, who of course treated the same subject in Moses and Aaron, his incomplete opera, and some echoes of Wagner and Elgar, especially the Dream of Gerontius, and the use of the large orchestra with chorus, with solos, and with organ. But I think the most critical element of this is the marriage of the African American spiritual with a large orchestra that and with the chorus that tends towards the operatic. And so in the contextualization that we will do on Sunday, we have decided to precede the performance of the oratorio by a number of different treatments of spirituals, including the finale of Florence Price's first organ sonata, an extensive and wonderful improvisation on Go Down Moses by Fela Sowande, also for organ, and then the joint choruses will sing We Shall Overcome and also Lift Every Voice and Sing. And the Dett will be the crowning moment of this musical presentation. So that's the concert side of things. But I would love to turn the camera over to Dr. Ferdinand, and I'm sure as well as all of you will learn a lot about Robert Nathaniel Dett from Dr. Ferdinand. So, Dr. Ferdinand.
Thank you so much, and it's a real pleasure to be here on this Zoom to talk about a composer that I truly adore and love. And just like you, I had this burning desire to do whatever I can to ensure that his compositional voice is heard. The progress of people of African heritage in classical music offers an intricate portrait that is not always clearly visible. However, their contribution can be readily seen in Negro spirituals, in jazz, and gospel, and other popular styles. Black musical influences stretch far and wide. Jazz rhythms and blues intervals infuse the concert music of Ives, of Gershwin, of Copland here in America, of Ravel and Milhaud and Dvorak abroad, and many more recent composers from both sides of the Atlantic. Yet, many music history books have given an inadequate account of the many significant contributions to classical music composition from persons of color, such as Robert Nathaniel Dett. Robert Nathaniel Dett was of African descent, and he was a composer, a pianist, and music educator of the 20th century. As with any musician, he is best understood when he is seen against his ancestral backdrop. Dett arose in the American musical scene at a time when the Negro people of the United States experienced financial despair towards the desires, educational adversity, and physical brutality. Consequently, Dett did not climb beyond the heights of a minor American composer, and his musical outpourings were dominated by the idioms of 19th century Romanticism. Dett, like Dvorak, did not start a new school by using the Negro tunes in his larger forms, yet he did make dramatic and effective use of the Negro spirituals and clothed them in classical garb. He became, by the historical milieu of his time, an attentive social thinker. His concerns and attitudes reverberate in his musical outpourings. And instead of conforming to more recognized music forms, Dett chose to walk the path of preserving and further developing his unique Afro-American musical heritage. The Negro spirituals served as the toolbox from whence Dett expanded the simple tunes of the cotton fields into more extensive art forms. As was mentioned before, Robert Nathaniel Dett was born in Drummondsville, Ontario, on October 11th, 1882. Both of his parents were musical by all our accounts, and Dett's first music lessons were with an English lady. This is important to note. At age 11, an Austrian served as Dett's music teacher. And by this time, his aptitude to improvise and his natural musicality started to blossom. When he was 14 years old, he worked as a bellboy at the Cataract Hotel located in Niagara Falls. And during his breaks, he was allowed to play the grand piano, and his playing attracted the admiring attention of guests of the hotel, and he made many, many friends. At one of Dett's impromptu recitals, one Dr. Hope from Germany became very impressed with the young talent. And Dr. Hope then conversed with him, imparting information about Dvorak and his use of Indian and Negro melodies as thematic seeds for larger forms. Dr. Hope urged Dett to come to Germany to receive musical training. And it's interesting to note that the aforementioned discussion initially made no immediate impression on young Dett. As a matter of fact, the singing of Negro spirituals, it was not foreign, but for him, they had no particular meaning. In fact, Dett later himself shared that discussion of Negro spirituals or other Negro folk music was embarrassing to Black people, as a general attitude towards such music was unappreciative or even mildly contemptuous. And Dett spoke of this feeling in an interview published by Musical America in 1918, and I quote, and you see it there on the screen: "The Negro people as a whole cannot be looked to as a very great aid in the work of conserving their folk music. At the present time, they are inclined to regard it as a vestige of the slavery they are trying to put behind them and to be ashamed of it." In other words, they did not want to look back into that awful past. So they chose to, some people chose to stay away from even discussing it or being a part of that. From 1901 to 1903, Dett studied at the Halstead Conservatory in Lockport, New York. At the end of the first day of study at this conservatory, Dett gave his first serious piano recital. This included, in addition to works by Beethoven and Schumann and MacDowell, several of his own unpublished compositions. The success of this recital and the confidence showed in him by Mr. Halstead himself prompted Dett to think seriously about a musical career. In 1903, Dett enrolled in a 5-year course of study at Oberlin College in Ohio, one of the finest conservatories of music. And in a bid to foster diversity, Oberlin reached out to many Black students, encouraging them to enroll. Dett had a very charismatic personality and quickly became well-loved by both faculty and students. Warner Concert Hall, located there on the campus of Oberlin, was always crowded when Dett gave his recitals. And this trait of being able to bring people of different races together for a central purpose would be seen time and time again in the life and in the career of Dett. Dett accomplished an admirable academic record, and he gained entry into Phi Beta Kappa, was the first Negro to complete the Bachelor of Music degree and graduated with first-class honors. Dett's studies at Oberlin included 4 years of composition. The greatest influence on Dett was instruction in composition that he received from Professor G. W. Andrews. It was also during his time at Oberlin that the Kniesel Quartet appeared in recital. And when Dett heard the slow movement from Dvorak's Quartet in F, which is based on traditional airs, the idea was born of using these Negro folk melodies in art music. So, with his knowledge of counterpoint and harmony, coupled with a spark of the Negro tradition and the zest of being a recent graduate, this launched Dett in what was to become a career in serious music. In September of 1908, Dett embarked upon his teaching career, and his first teaching assignment was at Lane College in Jackson, Tennessee, where he garnered knowledge of many new Negro songs from the students and the people in that community. The vast majority of these songs were in that Negro spiritual tradition. So, consistent with his early experience at Oberlin, he quickly became very much loved and respected by the faculty and students. Music was without question the central motivation in Dett's life. He maintained an arduous teaching load, a rigorous practice regimen, and served as an organist of a local church. As if this were not enough, he added a community chorus while at Lane College. His charismatic nature and impeccable reputation made the gathering of such a vocal force easier than the norm. Subsequently, he accepted a position in the Department of Music at Lincoln Institute, now Lincoln University, in Jefferson City, Missouri. 1 year later, in 1912, get my motion sensor here, in 1912, his Magnolia Suite for piano was published. This suite comprises 5 individual pieces and aptly depicts imagery related to the life of the Negro people in the South. The suite is an interesting cross between parlor music conventions and African-American melodies. It was during this time period that he traveled to Memphis, Tennessee, and Birmingham, Alabama, and performed successful recitals. The recitals attracted, yet again, a record diverse audience, reminiscent of his days at Oberlin and his days at working at that hotel in Niagara Falls. News of the success of all his work in academia and the triumphs in his recitals spread far and wide. Dett was appointed director of music at Hampton Institute in Hampton, Virginia in 1913. At the time, the institution enrolled the highest number of Negroes in the country and enjoyed a reputation of high scholastic success. It was in this atmosphere that Dett began to water his seeds of thoughts in regard to the education and musical heritage of people of African descent. The then president of Hampton Institute, Dr. Hollis Frizzell, shared with Dett his wish to form the Hampton Choral Union with the goal of bringing the community and the institute closer. So Dett reached out to various church choirs and musical organizations in the community to join forces with personnel from the institute. Rehearsals were held in Clark Hall, and all of these buildings still exist on the campus of what is now Hampton University, which even today reverberates the sounds of its ancestors. You go to that hall and you just sense that something special happened in this building over the many, many years. In May of 1914, the first concert of this choral force was presented. The large crowd that gathered for this event enjoyed a varied program and had as its musical guest soloist, and you may recognize his name, Harry T. Burleigh. Burleigh was a famous singer-composer and at the time was living in New York. The concert comprised of arrangements of Indian and Negro melodies of Burleigh, plus Dett's setting of Listen to the Lambs, which perhaps is the most famous piece that most people know of Nathaniel Dett. Dett founded the Musical Arts Society in 1919, and it became one of the most outstanding college concert series in the nation. The National Symphony, Marian Anderson, and the Westminster Choir were some of the featured guests of this series. The students of Hampton Institute were recipients of these nuggets of cultural life, and the community was enriched as well. In 1920, Dett took a brief sabbatical to study at Harvard University, and while there, he won a literary prize for his essay entitled The Emancipation of Negro Music. In this narrative, he warned about the danger of losing the real essence of African American music through commercialization. Later, he won the Francis Boat Music Award for his composition for the 6-part chorus, Don't Be Weary, Traveler. It was after this year of study that he returned to Hampton Institute with a fire to use the American Negro folk melodies as thematic material for developing larger artistic forms. And if you're following, now you see where the performance this weekend is coming to light. Dett pressed toward his goal and kept up his heavy schedule of composing, in addition to his teaching, directing the Choral Union Choir, managing the Musical Arts Society, performing recitals, writing, and conducting the Hampton Choir. It was in these inspired years that the first extended work of Dett was born, and this is the Chariot Jubilee, which was done in 1919. Dett received invitations from many parts of the United States and Canada to lecture, to perform recitals, to present the Hampton Choir, and to arrange Negro spirituals. He received the honorary Doctor of Music degree from Harvard in 1924 and from Oberlin in 1926. Dr. Dett had the opportunity in 1929 to travel to Paris, and my colleague here mentioned this before, to study with Nadia Boulanger at her school there in Paris. And in 1930, the Hampton Institute Choir did a European tour, performing in major concert halls and singing for European dignitaries. In a swift turn of events in 1931, Dett was asked to resign from his position. From all accounts, the then president of Hampton Institute, President Howe, Howie, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, was not aligned with the philosophies of Professor Dett as it related to exposing music students to all aspects of music, which is what Dett was trying to do, expose them to all aspects and facets of music. A means of fostering racial harmony, which is something Dett was big on. In the midst of the resignation saga, Dett had secured a leave of absence from Hampton for the academic year 1931 to 1932. He sought instruction at the Eastman School of Music in Rochester, New York, and on June 30, 1932, he received a Master of Music degree in composition. The Ordering of Moses was his compositional thesis that was later published. In 1937, Dett accepted a visiting directorship at Bennett College in Greensboro, North Carolina. In that same year, The Ordering of Moses was premiered. It was under the patronage of the Cincinnati Music Festival Association that this premiere took place. And this was also mentioned in the introductory part of this session today. Dett, despite the love of his family, love of the Bennett campus, became very, very restless, and his schedule did not allow him much time to compose, and he missed the stimulation afforded by the bigger cities. His mind wandered back to Rochester and the facilities of the university that had been at his disposal. He resigned his position at Bennett College in 1942 and, with his family, returned to Rochester, New York. And without missing a beat, he involved himself in the music and the culture of the city. He also joined the United Service Organization as musical director in February of 1943. In July of that year, he was sent to Battle Creek, Michigan, to direct the musical arm of the USO, the United Service Organization. And unfortunately, on October the 2nd, 1943, he died in Battle Creek from a heart attack. Like Dvorak and Coleridge Taylor and Harry T. Burleigh, among many others, Dett was truly sold on the idea that the Negro folk songs were significant enough to merit the construction of larger forms around them. And armed with his distinguished training, he proved to be a champion for that cause. So that's the Cliff Note version of Dett's biography, his life, and his many posts along the journey.